Hi folks, Rod Bender here. I've been saltwater fly fishing most of my adult life. I've fished with some of the finest fishermen in the world and some of the best guides available. I've learned an awful lot from these people, and I'd like to share some of that information with you. So come along with me and let's have some fun. Hi folks, Rod Bender here. Today we're going to leave the saltwater field for a while. I'm going to delve a little into the dark side, tie a freshwater fly, something that works extremely well on bass. It can be used in saltwater, although these hooks that I'm using are not meant for saltwater. So you either have to be very careful and rinse them off after you use them, or just not put them in the salt to begin with. Excuse me. They're also a very light wire hook. They're not very stout, so if you're after 24 to 30 inch snook or something like that, or a 10-pound redfish, it may not survive. Anyway, this, as you can see in the vise, is an offset worm hook for bass fishing with conventional gear, casting reels, spinning reels, whatever. We're going to take and make this a pretty much weedless fly that I've caught scores of bass with, both up north in Connecticut and down here in the southern states. And it's very, very simple and easy to tie. Now the reason I chose a nice, simple, easy tie was it's getting warm outside and we don't want to take too long. I've got a nice cold Corona and a nice warm Nicaraguan cigar waiting for me, so let's get started. Okay, the first thing, as we always do, is pinch the barb. Two real good reasons for pinching the barb. The first is for the fish. A lot of times all I have to do is grab the hook here and give it a twist and the fish will fall right off. You don't have to touch them to release them. The second is when it gets stuck here or here or here, it's easy to come out. The barb isn't going to hold it in. We're going to take this hook. Now, I've already tested this hook. It's got an extremely sharp razor point, so we're not going to have to touch this one up. Put it in the vise. And before I get started, I hadn't mentioned this before, but usually before I even set up for a session, I take an emery board that I've purchased it anywhere. You can get them anywhere: Walmart, CVS, Walgreens. It has a medium side and a heavy coarse side. If any of you work with your hands for a living and they get a little chapped, chafed, you get a little hangnail going on here, it's not really for the nail. My nails never become a problem, but dried skin across the top of my thumb and across the top of my index finger, where the thread is always laying and dragging across, it catches, it frays the thread. I take this, as a matter of fact, I have a little boo-boo finger right now, as you can see. Stuck my finger where it didn't belong. So, and it's got a little ragged edge to it. So I'm just going to take the skin and polish up the skin with this. And the same thing with my thumb, right across the top and right across the pad. Now we're not going to go robbing safes or anything, but this does go a long ways to keep that aggravating hang-up from hanging with your thread. When you always get your thread and it's coming down that finger, it won't hang up. It's as smooth as the baby's behind. Okay, we have the hook in the vise. We're going to start with the hook inverted. It's pretty much going to stay that way. And what will happen is we're going to tie some bucktail on, and it's going to shroud this hook. The hook point will be about halfway into the middle of this bunch of bucktail that we're going to tie on. All the tying will take place between the back end of the eye and this first bend. You have a very short working area to deal with. Some of these hooks have a longer shank area before this bend. I normally take just about any one I can find and learn to work with it. You're not going to tie a lot of material on, so you don't need an awful lot of room. I'm going to start this with white thread. It's 170 denier. I still want it to be fairly strong. Just going to put a thread base down just shy of that. First bend, cut off my excess. Now this is going to want to fall off the edge of that hook all the time. So I'm going to put a half hitch in it and keep that from happening. Now it's going to stay put. Again, there are a few differences a few adjustments I should say, that you have to make for this fly, and that's one of them. Start with some white bucktail. All these any basic baitfish pattern always has a white belly. You're not going to take a whole lot. You always take half again as much as you need, because you're going to thin this out. As you might be able to see, there's a lot of flyers here. They stick almost straight out. So what I'm going to do, I could put this in a stacker and get them all even. I don't want to do that. I want them to taper. So I'm going to grab this right here, and I'm going to pull with this hand and pull all the shorts out. All these short stubbies, see them? There's quite a bit of it. Now, if I go further down towards the tail end of these flies, maybe another 1/4 inch or so, or 3/8 of an inch, as you notice, more will come out. These are the ones that are intermediate in length. So now I'm left with a nice array of pure white, all about the same length. They taper just a little bit. We want this to end up, you want it to be about a 2.5, 3-inch bait fish. So that's what we've got here. We've got approximately a little over 2 inches, 2.5 inches. So I'm going to measure it, and I can move this forward or back wherever I want to start it. If that's where I want to start it, that's my tie-in point. My tie-in point is right here on the material. So I transfer by touching fingers together, and now I have that same tie-in point has been transferred to my material hand. I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it just as long as this piece of shank is, and I'm going to cut it at a slight angle. The whole idea is to get a little bit of a taper going so that when I tie the head off, I just don't have this bulk of thread that just drops off. Okay? Take a little drop of super glue, not much, just a touch. Put it on there, pinch very hard with your material hand, come straight down on the material and hold it right on top of the hook. Make a couple of wraps, pull down straight. Now I can pull it back a little bit if it's riding up over the eye of the hook, and then I'm going to secure it all the way up and back up again. Now, this is my base layer. As you notice, it's laying almost downward. I want it to be laying about this attitude. So how do I get it there? I lift this up, I lift the whole bunch up, and I make a couple of turns behind it. Come back up here in front. And now, I've captured a couple of them. We'll go knock those babies down. Now you notice, don't be afraid of those little flyers, just get rid of them. They don't want to cooperate anyway. Now you notice most of this tail is covering the hook. We're going to top it off with a little bit of chartreuse, but before we do that, we put a little flash in the middle. Don't go crazy with your flash. This is actually more than I need. I can do with half of this because I'm going to double it over anyway. All right. Just about any flash you want. If you've got dark waters, you may want to go with a a gold flash or a copper flash or something like that. Most of the waters are fairly clear. Again, I go about halfway. And now if you notice, I have my thread up right behind the eye. There's a reason for that. I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to grab the other half with these two fingers. And I'm going to come straight down right there. Lay it back and make a couple of wraps just to get it started. Now, if I flatten it out and keep this V going, it's in a V shape at the top of that hook, and tighten it down there, it doesn't lay on top of the white, it lays towards the top half but on both sides. It acts more or less like a lateral line on any bait fish or any fish. Again, I've mentioned before in other videos, don't be afraid to have your flash go beyond the tail, but you don't want it half again the length of the fly. I put my scissors in there and I just poke them around and pull a little bit so that it's tapered and it's not all chopped off at the same length. Sometimes it helps just to wet your fingers a little bit and see what that's going to look like. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go back forward again. I'm going to grab a little hank of chartreuse. Again, I'm going to grab a little more than I need for the finished product, because at the base, a lot of that stuff is short fluffs and they're fairly straight. And I really like, when I'm shopping for a bucktail, I like a bucktail that has a little crinkle to it. Adds a little more character to the fly. So now I have a few strands here that are really long. Just pull them out. Don't be afraid to pick at these things. It's not rocket science. Nobody's going to count the number of hairs on this thing. Again, you measure it so it's even with your white bucktail. Right there. And transfer it over. Also, another little tip. It helps sometimes when you grab that, it wants to flatten out and not keep the shape that you have. If you give it a little twist, it'll help hold it together. See? It stays bunched closer together. So now I'm going to cut this, again, at a slight angle. I'm going to put just a touch of super glue on the bottom of it. Keeps a lot of these strands from getting pulled out by a fish, so that you get into a nice hole and you're catching a few fish. You don't end up with a bare hook because all your feathers or all your hairs got pulled off by one fish, and now you gotta retie another one. I'm gonna go back. Now I'm gonna build up a little bit of a head, a little bit of a taper. Blend those two together, one on top of the other. Again, you want this very sparse. These fish are zeroing in most of the time on small bait fish that come within their lay. They will sit there sometimes and ambush whatever comes by. Now, almost all bait fish that I've seen in my travels end up with a dark back. One of the best things in the world you can use is peacock herl. So grab yourself a good bunch of peacock herl and pull them up about the same length. They can taper a little bit, and I just readjust them till I get them where I want them. And again, this is another piece of material where you want to use a little more than normal. It's very fragile stuff and it breaks fairly easily, but it makes a great back for these flies. I use it a lot on my deceivers when I tie striper flies, and it makes a world of difference. It really looks better in the water. So you get a bad curly one, just get rid of it. Okay, we've got plenty here. There's probably 8 or 9. Now the ends of these things are very, very brittle. So what we're going to do is we're going to choke up here. We're just going to pinch them and break them off. They're very brittle to begin with. So break them off. And it is a bit of a taper to that, which is what we want. Now we go Write down the material again, and that's what we have. The little bit stubbier ends are here. They're nice and strong now. We measure that just short of where our bucktail ends. Our bucktail ends about here, so just a little shy of it. So this is my tie-in point right here. I'm going to cut these off. Just a touch of super glue on the top of this thing. Just enough so it looks a little wet. Doesn't take much. Now if I pinch the hook and the material together with the material laying on top, it won't wrap around. It won't start to spiral around the hook. And then I just push my fingers back by bringing the thread right up against the edge of my fingers and walking it back a little bit. Now you build up a base, get rid of all those fuzzies that show up. Okay, we work this back, make sure we cover up any little bit of fuzzies. If you look close at a peacock herl, it's got a very, very fine stem, and all these little feathers come off the end of it. Once we get that far, we take our whip tool and put 4 or 5 turn whip finish. I pull tight. A lot of times on a fish like this, on a bluegill fly or something like that, I probably wouldn't bother. But on a bass fly, I'll do another 4 or 5 behind that one. And again, hang on to your hook and just kind of wiggle this around and pull on it at the same time very lightly. It works this thread down in the base of that thread, and we're done. All that's left to do, trim off anything you don't like, any flyers. Sometimes I wet my fingers, put them all together, see what this thing might look like. It's very sparse. It imitates, if you look at it, it imitates a bait fish pattern. It's got a bit of a belly to it, and all this material is completely encased that hook. So it's very little it's going to really hook up on. You're going to hook lily pads by the stem. You're going to have to pull it free. Nobody's going to fish this for bass in a weed infested pond or around the lily pads without using at least 10 to 15 pound test. If I'm bass fishing, I usually use anywhere from 15 to 20 pound test line. So it's very weedless. You could lay this on top of the lily pads and skip it across the top. It won't hook up on anything usually. When it does, just rip it free of the leaf. Very good pattern. All that's left to do with it now is just use a little head cement. I don't like to use super glue for the head cement. It doesn't seem to sink in as well. I thin down my hard as nails or any cheap clear lacquer that you can find, and I thin it down with a little bit of lacquer thinner so it absorbs into the thread a little better. And there you go. It's a very, very effective bass fly. Very effective fly for both the north and southern waters. Smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, they love to eat it. And I love my Corona. So this is Rod Bender saying, remember, this is all supposed to be fun. It's just fishing. Let's go out there and have a good time. Thanks for joining.